En el nombre del Padre, del Hijo y del Espíritu Santo. Today, the second Sunday after Epiphany, I am honored and humbled by the gift of ministry and for the faithful witness of all of you gathered here today in this magnificent place to celebrate the life of a great man, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He was both a wise man following the star of truth, as well as one of the greatest gifts to humanity. The star led the three wise men to be a part of a mystical movement. They followed the light, they witnessed to the child, and their willingness to go and visit that child is what testified to the Gentiles the manifestation of Christ in our midst. It is all about love. Those were the words of the presiding bishop at the last evangelism conference in Texas. He said, if it is not about love, it is not about Jesus. Today's reading about the conspiracy to kill Joseph, the dreamer, the gospel to love our enemies, and Paul's reminder to arm ourselves against evil. Those are all lessons of love. Deep, profound, and critical love. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. That brings me to my knees. I am so grateful for the life and ministry of this man, for this great gift of critical love to America and to the world. Here I am, a Latina, a woman of color, writing on the hard thoughts of rights and opportunities once denied to people like me in the church, and even in the Episcopal Church. Here I am, aquí estoy, witnessing to and testify to the life of a man who brought justice and rights to millions. It is hard for me to love my enemies, love those who hate me, love and pray for those who abuse me. And yet, King's life of witnessing to justice testifies with Christian love and charity to those who harm others. He was the prophet for times of darkness and misery. Misery for so many is what called Dr. King to be the prophetic voice of his time. Today's gospel challenged me to preach peace and harmony when all what I want to do is open a big, deep hole and stay there. Images and sounds around me are rather scary. The hateful language, go back to Mexico, go back to your country. Even from our elected leaders. You are not wanted. People of color hear this message over and over in different places. We are many times not welcome in our own jobs, schools, and even our own churches. Perhaps you have been feeling like me. Perhaps you heard the gospel and know that it is hard to love your enemy and it is truly a challenge. But here we are, led to do it. So the question for us today is, what are we called to actually do? What is it about Christianity and the words of Jesus that are so challenging? It is love. It is the realization that love cannot be simply philosophical, spiritual, or symbolic. Love is active. Love is action. It's both the means and the end. We are called to love our enemies to the point of discomfort, witnessing to them the light of Christ with just presence. Presence and assurance that we will stand with the victims, the homeless, and the marginalized. We are called as a church to go into the world and prophesy, speak the truth to those who hate us, and to be supportive of those who are oppressed. This kind of love requires bravery. It requires bravery because it requires our own bodies and our own presence. And sometimes we have to be present with people who are oppressed and who are different. Let us be the brave church of God. Dr. King, in his letter from the Birmingham jail, reminds us, if today's church do not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authenticity, forbid the loyalty of millions, and will be dismissed as the irrelevant social club in the 20th century. Those were his words then that continue to be true to us today. This is the work that we must be part of. I came to this country 30 years ago, lived in Mississippi for more than 20, married a sweet, wise Southerner, a loving, caring man. Together, we became Episcopal priests. I confess that on November 9th, I woke up and I cried. I cried about the results of the election. But after a while, I pray. I pray for compassion and mercy. I pray for understanding and charity for those in power. And I pray for my sweet husband, Horace, suffering now from the devastating illness of Alzheimer's. I was actually grateful that he was not able to understand what just happened to our country. You see, Horace was the one who taught me to love Dr. King and to love the legacy of the civil rights movement. I didn't grow up in this country. I don't know if you noticed the accent. Horace was aware of his white privilege, especially as a Southerner. Racism, segregation, and Jim Crow were the issues for most of his life in Mississippi. He will say that the greatest sin of this nation was racism, followed by greed. He felt obligated to speak against racism wherever he found himself in. He was always speaking for the oppressed and the marginalized. Racism, he used to say, is insidious. One must always be alert, and one cannot let it sneak into one's soul. He said that for whites, and I will add, for new immigrants and for Latinos and for the rest of us, it's a daily struggle against an unconscious bias. That in order to combat racism, you have to be willing to talk about it and bring it out on the light. Yes, bring it out. Talk about it. Face it. For a split second, minorities in this country saw the promised land. We saw that image of the dream. This country elected its first African-American president. And then, somehow, we were awakened to some type of nightmare, to see the outrageous racial injustices in our political system, the impunity of the killing of young, innocent, unarmed African Americans, the rise of hate groups, mass incarceration of blacks and Latinos, increasing Islamophobia, the dismantling of institutions that support and promote health for women, and other accomplishments gained in the last 50 years. It felt like the speedy reversal of human rights. Dr. King is no longer with us, but his legacy for justice is. So we look back through history and find the new voices of today. Standing Rock water protectors, and those in the street crying, Black Lives Matter. Those are the new voices fighting for basic human dignity in the land of the free and the home of the brave. They are chanting Black Lives Matter in response to Black people's collective experience of oppression in the United States. And it is more than just police abuse. Black Lives Matter is talking about the ways in which Black people are deprived of basic human rights and dignity, acknowledging the millions of people locked in prison. Today's freedom fighters, like Dr. King, are using their minds, bodies, and their time on this earth to protect humanity. One of the founders of this movement is the executive director of Black Alliance for Just Immigration. The message is one of solidarity with immigrants, LGBTQ, and indigenous people, protesting and protecting the basic human rights of all of us. Jesus stood in solidarity with those who were oppressed, and so he is standing with us today. Electricity followed the path of least resistance, but justice does not. Obtaining justice for all people, we now see, has never been easy, and it should never be taken for granted. We know that Dr. King will have been present with the families of Tamir Rice and Sandra Bland, to mention just few. He will have witnessed to the powerful demanding, stop the killing of my people. He will have organized peaceful marches, peaceful demonstrations, and prayer vigils. He will have been in Flint, Michigan, and at Standing Rock. He will have boldly preached the gospel of God. He would have remembered what Paul says in the letter to the Ephesians. Be strong in the Lord. For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. My brothers and sisters, our enemies are no other children of God, but rather insidious forces of racism, prejudice, and greed. That is what gives the strength to oppression. Let us be awake, alert, and clear-eyed about these things. Just this Friday, in Arizona, a state bill was introduced that will ban classes and events in public schools that promote social justice towards any race, gender, religious, or political affiliation. Just this week, in a state where every street name is a Spanish name and every landmark is indigenous, the legacy which brings us all here today is at risk of being lost for future generations. Let us be brave. Let us take courage and love critically. We have to be awake, and we have to have the wisdom of those who travel to visit the child in the manger. But also, let us not be so self-righteous that we will call the obvious racism but remain silent in the presence of what I call gentle self-racism and prejudice, of which we may be perpetrators and beneficiaries. Dr. King said that shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. This kind of truth-telling takes courage. He's talking about us, you and me, the church, the institutions in which we lived. It is uncomfortable. It makes us feel weird because it is so critical. But boy, isn't that love? We must have the conviction to practice critical love in our workplaces, in our schools, and in our churches. In our daily life, we must be brave about humanity's need for us, now, right now, and do what we can, because we can. Sí se puede. When Christ loved us critically and prayed for humanity, when he put his body on the line, the universe shifted. And resurrection and hope shine. When Dr. King loved us critically and prayed, it was active, it was transformative, and we were forever changed. Christ's critical love for us holds us accountable. Dr. King's critical love sounds like a sermon, looked like a sit-in, and moved like a march. His hope for a better world healed and continued work for the human condition. My husband Horace would have loved to be here today to share with us and to honor and celebrate the life of this magnificent hero. He honored the life of Dr. King by teaching others, like myself and our daughters, by preaching about radical inequality, by continuing and maintaining the legacy that brought a promise of freedom and justice, a new life for so many. As we enter this new, challenging era, let us remember the Epiphany celebration of Christ in our midst, the opportunities of new life and new light to the world. And let us not forget, it is all about love, because it is all about Jesus. Dr. King was anointed as we were anointed in our baptism to bring the love of Christ to the world. He preached with boldness the mystery of the gospel. He left us a legacy of commitment and persistence towards justice. I am grateful for the memorable people like my husband and people like you who are not only honoring and celebrate the legacy, but who will live it to preach it, teach it, and witness it. The legacy of hope has to live on and find new home in the hearts of our new arriving immigrants, our children, our teenagers, and never, ever be forgotten. So my brothers, my sisters, mis amigos, mis amigas, mis hermanos y hermanas, go bravely, take the light of Christ, and bring the blessing of Christ to others as evidence of the Christ's presence in this world. Go, be brave, y sí se puede. Sí se puede. Amén.